talked on this show before about how to give and receive feedback in a way that makes everyone feel awesome. Well, another mechanism to keep everyone on the same page is something called a one-on-one. Now, before you tune out, these aren't those crappy performance reviews or project update one-on-ones. These are regular informal chats to keep really healthy dialogue between manager and employee. If you're interested in figuring out how to implement these in your company, we have Jason Avanish from Lighthouse to lead us into the horizon. Here we go. Hey there, welcome back to Building Remote Teams. I am here with Jason Avanish from Lighthouse. Jason, hi.
Hey, Jevin, thank you for having me today.
Real pleasure. I've used your software, Jason, in teams that I've had before, and it's worked out super well for me before. Now, we're not here to promote Lighthouse, really, although I think it's great, so everyone should check it out. But tell me a little bit about what you do, and tell me a little bit about Lighthouse.
I am the co-founder of Lighthouse. We're software to help people be better managers. Started about 5 years ago now. Really trying to scratch my niche. Realized that there was a handful of things that I could do as a manager that would really have a huge impact on how my employees, my team members, people who worked with me felt about work. But it wasn't always easy to be consistent. And so the idea with Lighthouse is to help you be more consistent. How do you have a really awesome and amazing one-on-one where you're accountable and they're accountable and you talk about the right things? How do you help them with their career development and things like that? And so what we did is we kind of took what I learned and productized that. And so the product's evolved over the years. One of the cool things is we find that remote is even harder to manage people. And I'm sure we'll get into that today. But we've learned a lot from the people, especially that manage remote teams, that there's a few extra challenges there. And so really excited to be on the podcast today to kind of talk about what some of those challenges are and what are some of the common things you can do as a manager, whether you're remote or not.
That sounds great. So where are you calling in from today, Jason?
So I am in New York City. I was previously living in San Francisco, decided to make the move back to the East Coast where I'm from. And the team is distributed. So we're practicing what we preach with some of this remote stuff with our team as well.
Nice. And so you're in like a home office, or you can co-work, one of the many co-working spaces in New York? Where are you at? What do you see when you look around?
An interesting side effect that I've discovered since moving to New York is that a common perk in offices is dogs, and I'm allergic to dogs. So I had planned to be in co-working spaces, but so many of them have dogs running around that I'm working out of the home office, or I go to coffee shops quite a bit when I don't have calls like this and don't need to worry about it being quiet.
Yeah, I have that same issue. I'm allergic to essentially the entire environment. And so I've got like a 15-minute bike ride to my co-working space, and then I'm like sneezing and stuff, but we don't have dogs and cats. And that's a big issue for me. And so that's interesting to hear from other people who have similar issues. Jason, your software, primarily, or at least seems to be focused around managing one-on-ones, and we've all maybe had some sort of meeting with a manager where we've talked about various things. Can you tell me about the different types of maybe what people call one-on-ones, and then maybe what you call one-on-ones and why you're a proponent of it?
Well, I think of one-on-ones as the Swiss Army knife for the manager. There's so many things you should do as a manager that you never get around to, that like one-on-ones are a fantastic place to wedge all those in. I think the mistake managers make is they either discount having the meetings at all, or they don't realize all the things they could cover. So they cover a very narrow margin. For instance, managers will make their one-on-one status updates to talk about projects, but that's super inefficient because the rest of the team isn't in the room. And so now you have to play telephone individually with everyone on your team. It's really inefficient, and it eats up all this time. You could do a whole bunch of other things. And so some of the different topics that we try and tell managers that they should talk about are things like, building rapport and trust. Because if you don't have that foundation of them feeling like you care about them, it's going to be really hard for them to come to you with problems and questions and want to answer things you ask them honestly. But even beyond that, you want to talk about their career goals, because one of the leading ways I saw people in the Valley leave work is this idea of, I really like my coworkers, I have challenging work, I'm super happy, but I'm kind of getting bored of the things I do every day. And if the manager isn't having a regular conversation about that topic, they'll think everything's all good right up until one of their friends is like, oh, I'm at this new hot startup and we're doing this cool other thing. We could totally use someone like you. And they start thinking, this would be a really interesting new challenge. And they have all the same perks that the other company had. Why don't I jump over there? And then they lose the person because they thought that talking once a year performance review was enough. So like talking about your career is good. It's also good to give and receive feedback, to coach them or to hear from them how you or the team can improve. It's also great for talking about how the company can improve. Especially with remote work, when you have partially remote teams, it's super helpful to check in and make sure people feel like they're in the loop, or find out where they feel like they're disconnected from the rest of the team because they're not in the office to hear everything. And then of course you also do things like check in on their happiness, or, again, like specifically focusing on special things specific to them. So whether it's remote or, a diversity kind of question, or anything that's unique to them that you want to make sure is okay. When else are you going to talk about it? Well, one-on-one's a great time to safely talk about it and not have it feel like it's a huge big deal where you're scheduling a separate meeting for it.
Now, you're saying it's a safe place. Now, managers that I know or that I've talked to about how do they manage their employees, it feels like there's this tension or this reluctance to talk to their employees because of potential conflict that could happen, where maybe people talk about them being unhappy, or, the managers just shy away from these meetings for one reason or another. Why is it so hard for managers to have these more informal asking questions of your employees and seeing where they're at and trying to build rapport? But why aren't people doing this?
I think some of it's fear. So I remember there was a study a couple years ago I saw that just really captured it well. And basically what it found was 69% of managers say there's something about their role as leader that makes them uncomfortable communicating with their employees. So 7 out of 10 managers are kind of afraid to talk about certain things with their team. They feel like it's taboo. And I'll be honest with you, I get that feeling sometimes too. And it's always like this little fight or flight fear thought that you have in your head. And you imagine the worst case scenario, what could happen if you have that conversation with them. And it's always worse than it really is. And the thing is your team feels that same way about different issues. Sometimes the same thing, sometimes different ones. But if you actually embrace and have the conversation over time, you start to realize that you're making mountains out of molehills, and they're not that big a deal. But if you let them fester, then they will become a big deal. And then they're much harder to deal with. A small issue over time, can be a big one. Like two team members who had a disagreement in a meeting, they may have already shook hands and forgot, or they may be a little upset over it. If you talk about it and work it out with them, then it's nothing and they're fine. But if you let it go, then that can start to become regular sniping in meetings. It can become them refusing to work together, and eventually people taking sides on the team, and somebody's got to go. And so it's all about this idea that if you fix problems when they're small as a leader, a lot of problems won't happen or won't get to a point where you really have anything to fear at all. So when it is just a little thing, that's when you should tackle it, and then you don't have anything to be afraid about. But I think that a lot of people are scarred by the things that maybe they or a previous manager procrastinated on and saw when it got messy and ugly. And you just need to embrace that fear and tackle it, because if you tackle it early, it won't ever get that bad at all. And in fact, the team will be like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I should. You know what? I should go talk to Joe about what happened in that conversation. I was a little snipey there, and I shouldn't be. Or, maybe it's like, oh yeah, you know what? Why don't we sit down and hash it out? And I'm sure we can come to an understanding. I'm glad you pushed me to do that. That's part of what you need to do as a leader.
So you're saying that people could, managers could be just be projecting or carrying over previous baggage from other poor experiences that they've had as an employee or working with a manager, and that they're carrying it on. And that's maybe why they're reluctant to meet with their employees, because they think this is how it's done.
Oh yeah. I think we're all driven by the experiences we have. I think we bring it in our personal relationships, obviously, and we bring it in our professional ones. And so even if you keep those two worlds separate, just like, a past relationship may affect a future relationship you have with somebody in your personal life, the same thing can happen in work. Things that you experience in a past job will impact you in a new job. Now, I think the best managers look at mistakes and things that happen as scars, and they'll say, you know what, that thing that happened to me as an employee, I'm never going to do that to my team. And so they can use that as a growth opportunity. But I think other people end up kind of taking some of those experiences and instead they scar them, and they're afraid, I want to avoid that at all costs. And so by having that fear of avoiding it, often you end up creating the exact environment that creates it again.
So, all right, I get it. So I think all of us believe that, okay, catching problems early is less expensive in every measure than catching something late. So how often then do you recommend having these one-on-ones as you're advocating for them with your team members, like a manager with an employee?
Sure. So I think you can be flexible in these. I think it's not one size fits all management. If you have somebody on your team that you've been working with for 5 or 10 years and you're really good friends outside of work and you guys just think on the same level and your strengths and weaknesses, you can probably meet with this person once a month and you're probably all good, except for when maybe something important is coming up and you want to meet more often. However, for a lot of other people, there are specific situations where weekly makes sense. So if someone's brand new on your team, I don't care how experienced they are, how well you know them, For the first couple of months, you should be meeting weekly with them because there's going to be questions. Your culture is different than the last job they had. The responsibilities may be different than the job description. Getting used to the rest of the team, finding the bathroom, like learning the cultural norms and mores. There's so many things to talk about when somebody's new on a team that you should spend a lot of time with them. And then obviously, if you have an underperformer, you want to meet with them weekly because you need to stay on top of them until the behavior changes. And then if somebody's new in a role or position, so one of the terms that we teach people a lot at Lighthouse is task relevant maturity. It's a term from Andy Grove's book, High Output Management, which is like the greatest leadership book ever written. And in it, what task relevant maturity is about is instead of judging people by them as a whole, like, hey, Jevin's a fantastic engineer, we should trust him at everything. You say, no, Jevin's a really good back-end engineer, and he's pretty good at a few of these front-end things. Well, if we put him on this new front-end project in React, well, he hasn't done a lot in React, so we should be a little more hands-on to support him. And so the idea is that you evaluate people based on individual tasks you're giving them, not by the person as a whole, because somebody could be really, really good at something and you can be hands-off there. And they could be really new at something and you should be really hands-on and support them, and they'll want the support there.
So you're breaking up kind of their whole job responsibility, character into these kind of mini parts and making sure that they're competent in each of them. And for those things that maybe they need to grow, you've just got more support.
Exactly. So you want to be more supportive of them. And one of the best ways to support them is your one-on-one, because at the time you're with them isolated, you're with them privately, you can ask questions, they know their set time, and it doesn't make a mountain out of a molehill. So like if I'm your manager and out of the blue I say, hey, we need to have a call, Jevin, that's going to probably be a little more nerve-wracking than if I'm just in the middle of the one-on-one and say, oh, Jevin, I don't know if you noticed, but I put this on the agenda. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about this. If it's just part of an agenda of a larger conversation, it doesn't feel like a big deal. But if I suddenly say, hey, we need to talk about this project, when can we talk today? Suddenly you're gonna be like, uh-oh, what's wrong? You get that sinking feeling. So the one-on-one ends up being a way to make things feel not as severe because you're just used to, of course we do these things in this meeting, and this is just one of many things we'll talk about.
Nice. That makes sense. Now, in the context of remote teams, it sounds like you're a big advocate for these one-on-ones kind of company or organization. Makes sense. But are they, for remote teams, are they more important, less important? How does that change the dynamic?
They are even more important remotely. As if anyone's been following kind of the explosion of popularity of remote work, as well as all the content now that people are putting out, like we are, as well as a lot of other people are putting out about remote work now, you'll notice that an overarching theme of all of them is communication, because all the little things you do in your office don't exist when you're remote. So all those little conversations that you could have don't work as well. So like when I used to live in San Francisco and we had an office as a team, I could literally walk out of a conference room after talking to a customer, and the guys would see that I had finished and say, oh, hey, Jason, how was the customer call? And I'd say, oh, it was great. I learned da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I would go over those handful of things. Well, I don't get to do that anymore. They don't even, other than if they were watching my status in Slack, they don't know what I'm doing and when I'm doing it. And I don't have that natural conversation break to talk to them. And I don't know when they're not busy to talk to them. So, I have to be more proactive about certain conversations, whether it be just posting in a Slack channel what those findings were, or using the one-on-one to answer more questions that normally would have other times for, you could call it osmosis to talk about it. So I think when you're remote, communication's even harder. There's more you need to learn on the fly. There's more questions that people can have, and there's more information you need to disseminate. And so while you shouldn't only and solely rely on one-on-ones to accomplish that, boy, one-on-ones are a great stopgap for that. They're a great way to fill in those gaps and ask the questions that will help you iterate on your communication process so that it gets better, so everybody feels included, everybody feels like they're heard, and everyone feels like they know what's going on.
That makes sense. So if I understand what you're saying is, as a remote team, just because communication is something we have to work at more, one-on-ones is a good tool to be able to have in your tool belt to be sure that everyone's feeling included and getting the information they need when maybe otherwise they're having a harder time.
Yeah, it's a proactive way to always be checking in to make sure the communication that you have is good enough. And then it's also a backstop against, things slipping too much. So you don't want to give all your company updates in your one-on-ones. But if somebody on your team feels like they missed some of the things you were trying to get across in your company update, the one-on-one is a perfect time to fill in those gaps and then hopefully go back to your other communication process, say your remote all hands, and realize what you need to iterate on so people get it more. Like maybe it's, not only go over things in slides, I should actually send the slides out afterwards so people can review them again, because people don't absorb everything the first time they see it. You'll iterate your way to getting there, but the one-on-one is then a great way to kind of catch some of those things and learn what else you need to possibly improve in other areas. So I guess don't rely on it, don't use it as a crutch, but it's a fantastic way to make sure nothing slips too far.
That makes sense. I spend a lot of time helping companies become remote friendly or remote first. So whether it's a traditional company and they want to be able to have a policy so they can help their current employees work remotely, or they want to start to scale and hire people externally. So I talked to a lot of founders, and one thing that I find is very common is founders say, or managers say, I just don't trust my employees to work remotely. I don't know if they're going to be doing their work at home. I don't know if they're going to be more productive, less productive. So as we're talking about one-on-ones as a tool to build trust, like maybe more generally, what can you do as an employer or as a manager to help develop that trust so that you can feel free to let them work from home or from anywhere, really?
Yeah, I think there's a few pieces of ways we can kind of dive into this. So the first one is that you should hire people you can trust, because if someone's only as trustworthy as you standing over them, making sure they do their work, that's not very scalable. And so I think if you are worried about that for a number of people on your team, then you may need to make changes on your team, because how loyal is that person really to what you're trying to accomplish if the only thing that's making them work is you watching them have a butt in a seat? I think that you end up having a lot of other problems that you're not prepared for if you're in a position where you've hired people you don't trust, because that's going to be reflected then in how you share information, how you manage people. And unfortunately, it can be very easy where if there's 2 or 3 people on your team you don't trust, but you do trust 6 or 7, unfortunately, some of your behaviors are probably going to be that you treat everybody like you don't trust them. And so that ends up hurting the people you want and deserve to be trusted. And so I guess the first thing I would say is you want to have people, you should hire people you can trust. And, that means looking for people that, do they do what they say they do? Do they follow through? If somebody, like, say you have an interview with somebody and they say, oh yeah, I'll follow up and send you that link, or they tell you something like, and they mention like some podcast or something, you say, cool, can you please send that to me? I'd love to check it out afterwards. Do they actually send it? Or how long does it take for them to send it? In my experience, little signs in the interview often turn into big signs on the job. And so looking to see how they handle themselves in that process is a great way to make sure you can trust them, or potentially even doing a try before you buy. So like at Lighthouse, we do trial projects with everybody. We'll do a small paid contract project to make sure that this person is a good fit for us. And so if it doesn't work, hey, you know what? You get $500 or something for a good day's work, and we'll part ways and we got a little bit of work out of you and we're happy. Or if it works out, cool, now you're coming on board, it's all good. And, on top of your paycheck you're going to get at the end of the month, we're going to give you your hourly rate we gave you for the day, or whatever we did as a test project. And so, there's a few ways to get around that. But once you have them involved, then you want to act with trust and you want to have people you can trust. And, I think that comes down to kind of a culture of ownership and accountability. So you hold them to outcomes and commitments, but you trust them to get the work done, for them to define with autonomy how they're going to do it. So you work with them on, what is the future going to look like? What is the task they need to get done? But leave that up to them on how they're going to get it done with an agreed upon time when it's going to be done. And so you'll hold them to when they said they'd do that thing by, but not worry as much about when exactly they're working to do it.
Got it. So I think, it's hard to know in advance, whether this is someone you're going to be able to trust, as you said, but maybe there's little signs. But certainly if the person has been working in your company or not, you'll have a strong sense whether you can trust this person or not, and whether or not, regardless of how they're actually going to perform remotely, whether you're actually going to trust them to be able to do that job based on their existing performance. That makes sense. And whether they're actually accountable and following through with what they say they'll do. Where's that breakdown of trust to say like, hey, yeah, you're fine to go and work remotely?
So I guess, are you talking about a company hiring their first remote person and the remote person has never been in working in the office? Or are you talking about companies where maybe some employees have really long commutes and they'd like to only come in the office like part of the time?
Yeah, let's talk about both are valuable, but let's talk about the latter, because I think that it's important for companies to start having a remote policy internally to get used to it and iron out like how it looks like for them to be enabled to hire people externally so they can just slide right into that existing kind of remote culture.
Sure. So I've seen a lot of companies dip their toe in the water with remote based on this kind of thing. So, some of the people they hire, with the cost of living and the way that every city is not building enough housing for everybody who wants to live in the city, you see that anybody who starts a family generally has to move out of the city, but all the jobs are in the city. So people end up having very long commutes. I know in New York City, it's nice that they have better transit than San Francisco did, but that also means that some people have really long commutes. I've met people since I got here who are commuting from Connecticut, who are commuting from New Jersey, or commuting from, more of New York State, we'll say. And they all have commutes that are anything from an hour to an hour and a half each way. That's a lot of life lost. And so for those people, that's not the most fun thing. Even if you let them work while they're on the train and they're tethered and you can see they're on Slack and they're doing things, like that's still a really long and unhappy commute. So those people often lobby to say, hey, can I work from home some days? And, with the distraction of open offices and stuff, it can actually be a net gain. If you make those remote days kind of no meeting days so that, your engineer can put his head down and really just focus on his work, or someone on your data science team can just analyze and not worry about a bunch of meetings interrupting their flow, that can be really powerful. And so, one way that companies I've seen have it work is dip your toe in the water. We're going to have a no meeting Wednesday. And because it's no meeting, you don't have to come to the office if you don't want to. But yes, we expect you to work. We expect if anybody pings you during the day, you're available. I think those are fair expectations. And you can see how it goes and start to build that trust where you can get confident and say, well, you know what? Let's look at commit history. Let's look at pull requests and let's see what work did or didn't get done. I've definitely heard of companies where, the number of commits is much higher on the work from home days. And it's because the engineers can just sit down and focus and they're not getting interrupted every couple hours when they were mid-flow doing their work. So I think you can dip your toe in the water and then look at the output of your team to see if it got better or worse. If it got better, ask the team, hey, what was different about getting to work from home? Oh, well, without the commute, I actually worked an extra hour and, I was able to really focus on this certain problem. And, when I got stuck, I took a walk and came back and I figured it out. And you just start hearing these stories from your team at work. Or if it doesn't work, and again, you talk about it in your one-on-one with your team, you start to hear from them. It's like, well, I thought working from home would be great, but it turns out, my kid's running around there and was distracting and the dog came in and then, how did that happen? And I've heard this, some people think working from home will be great. And then they work from home and they're like, this is terrible. I can't do this. So I think if you're thinking about trying it or you're thinking about doing it, try it first, see how it goes 1 day a week or 2 days a week. Let some of your team work from home who have long commutes or other people who think they benefit from it and literally try and look for ways to see how it went, both by qualitatively asking your team and quantitatively looking at things of what kinds of things got done? What got done yesterday? Was there more or less activity in Slack? Were there more or less commits and pull requests from the engineering team? Were there more or less blog posts written by the marketing team? Look at outcomes. You're not looking for clock punching. You're looking for results. And if they think they'll get more focused work done there, see if they really did. I definitely also know people who use work from home as a vacation day. So there is kind of two sides to that coin and you won't know until you take a look.
Yeah. I was talking to a guy the other day and, he's an HR professional. And when he initially went remote, he said he was watching Maury Povich for the first 3 weeks and just answering light emails. And then he realizes man, okay, I really need to get things done. And then he just figured out for him how to make it work. And he hunkered down and put on pants and got his work done. But certainly there is that. It is not for everyone. And I think, we talked about a link from Ron Hoover when you'd posted this and asked people online about on Twitter about, what works for them and remotely. I think it's a common theme. Although the research that I've looked at is people who self-select to work remotely, there's a higher productivity of individuals overall, but
yes,
love to work in the office. They need that as part of their routine for any number of reasons. They just like it. They like the social element. Or maybe they have distractions at home. They have a dog that needs walking every 20 minutes or, I've been at home for 3 maternity leaves with my wife at home. And so, there are challenges that exist in that for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason I like to, when I don't have calls, go to coffee shops because I know I'm more focused there. I can get some work done at home. Calls are easy and nice and relatively quiet, but Coffee shops definitely give me more energy just being around other people, even if I really am not like talking to them or anything. I just like having that physical space somewhere else to go and do things.
Hmm. I did an O'Reilly seminar a couple of weeks ago. There's about 200 people there, and we were talking about how to succeed as a remote employee. And a number of people brought up that they feel they're, left behind with their, and their manager forgets about them when they're in this hybrid team. So you have some people who are in the office where the manager is, and you have a remote employee who's at home and working away, quite productive, but they feel that they're really left out and forgotten by their manager. Let's assume that maybe they don't have frequent one-on-ones. What can they do about that?
I think being proactive is the first thing. So, you have to ask. So I remember in a past job, we were partially remote. So we had an office in San Francisco. We had people remote all over the country. Our lead designer was in Australia. So we had a lot of different things going on. And so not surprisingly, different people felt different levels of connection on what was going on in the company. And so one of the things that helped was the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so to speak. And so the people who brought up those concerns got more attention, and they would get more of those things addressed. But I also found that some people were a little more afraid to ask. And so I know for myself, because I was a product manager, I was meeting with like our engineers, having peer one-on-ones with them semi-regularly. And honestly, I originally started them because I wanted better relationships with the people I was building software with. Mm-hmm. It turned into about half the time was, here's all the things going in the office you don't know about. Here's all the things that you would probably benefit from hearing about. Or here's an answer to questions you have about something that, for me, because I heard things in the office, the announcement made perfect sense. For you, it's like, well, that came out of the blue. And so I think the best thing you can do as a remote person is ask those questions. If you're not sure, speak up. If you want to know more, ask, and realize you could ask a lot of different people. So yes, asking your manager is probably the best single source because, that would be who you'd ask if you were in the office. But it also just general company and culture things, like don't be afraid to hey, you're on a call with somebody else in another department or another team or a colleague or coworker. Before you sign off on the call, take a few minutes to be like, hey, can I ask you something else? Hey, I heard about X or Y, but it doesn't totally make sense to me. Can you give me a little more context? Or, hey, I heard about this change that's coming. What do you think of it? I don't feel like I know everything that's going on. Oh, I'm totally out of the loop too. Well, now it's everybody. Or they say, oh, well, here's some context. I saw this thing in the office, or I heard this other thing, or hey, a bunch of us were talking at lunch about that. So I think it's being proactive and asking is an important part, especially if you're a remote person and you're going into a company that isn't all remote or remote is new to their culture, then I think it's on you to be an advocate for yourself. And, from day zero, even when you're getting hired, being like, hey, I know that communication is going to be an interesting challenge. I want us to face it head on. So before we have an issue, I want to make sure that one, I have weekly one-on-ones with my manager to talk about these things. And two, I want to make sure that you guys have a strong culture, that there's a way for me to ask more questions. Just expect that I'm going to ask them. So set that expectation from when you start.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. As I'm putting myself in that position where I'm remote, let's say, and I'm starting to hear all of this stuff that's happening in the office that I wasn't privy to, I could see myself be really feel personally attacked in that. It's man, why wouldn't they include me? This is annoying. I'm also a valuable member of the team, and maybe there's a genuine reason why I should have been included either those decisions or that information dissemination. But it sounds like the perspective that you're taking is really owning that problem and just trying to come up with these small little strategies to be able to extract that information and trying not to take it personally, which I mean, that's a good learning even for me as I'm working with these organizations and where, it's hard to sometimes get this information when you're working on a hybrid team.
Yeah, I think because people who work remote are so passionate about it, if you tweet something negative about remote work, and I guarantee you, you will hear about it. And so what I think is important is that those people that are that passionate about it on Twitter bring some of that passion to the workplace as well. And in a constructive way of saying, hey, I'm passionate about this. I can be a bit of an expert on it. Let's talk about some of those shifts that need to happen so that, again, fixing problems when they're small. Certainly, I think one of the biggest challenges in remote work is the old, oh, we should get Jevin on the call for this, shouldn't we? The same way you would turn to a coworker, hey, Julian, come in this meeting with me and Jay. Can we borrow you for a second? We want your input. You need to make it as easy to do that remotely. So there's some really cool tools that are starting to come out that are trying to solve that. I think, whether it be just pushing the Slack call button can help, or there's a new tool that just came out of Y Combinator called Tandem that I think looks kind of interesting, where basically it shows you what people are working on at a given time. So like if you're coding right now, it will know that you're in your coding text editor, which is kind of leave them alone. They're in the zone. Yeah. Versus like, oh, they're working on this, they're working in this Google Doc right now or something like that. And then you can literally one click start an audio message and say, ping them and say, hey, Jevin, can you talk for a second? We want to loop you in on something. I also saw another startup, I forget their name off the top of my head, but they like literally have this like concept of rooms. And so people can move themselves in rooms like an avatar to say that, hey, I'm in an isolation booth working, or hey, I'm collaborating in a virtual conference room right now. So it sees everyone that's in the same Zoom call will appear in a room together. And so it creates this kind of virtual idea of like, where are people and can I grab them? And so for instance, I know my business partner, Eddie, who's head of the engineering team, he's sometimes just arbitraging support tickets. Well, if I need to talk to him when he's arbitraging support tickets, it's a great time to grab him for a quick phone call or something.
Right.
And so like knowing when people are and aren't available is a little harder when you're remote. And so I'm really excited about some of the tools that are coming to make it more obvious when you can ping someone and reducing the friction. So it is as easy as turning to someone to push a button and get them on the call.
Yeah, I think that tool you're talking about, or at least one of the ones that I saw is called Remo, I think, where it's almost like a virtual co-working space where it's like got these different rooms you can move around, and it seems pretty neat. I'm a big I love my co-working space. So
yeah, I also saw Microsoft was demoing technology. They have this new multi-camera system where literally one of the cameras will go on the whiteboard, and because it's multiple angles, it will figure out where you're standing in the way and give everyone remote an unobstructed view of what's being drawn on the whiteboard.
What the heck?
The demo looked incredible. I don't know what the reality may be on that, but if there's any company that could pull off something like that, it's certainly Microsoft. So I'm pretty excited about kind of some of those different things and how those may come together.
I think we're both tool guys. We could probably talk about our favorite tools all day. That's great. Jason, thanks a lot for coming on and sharing some of your ideas on how to build trust and build rapport and what healthy one-on-ones can look like and the power of them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Jevin. Hopefully this was helpful to everybody else. I will send you a couple of the links to some of the things we talked about today. So for instance, if anyone wants to check out some of the studies and things I talked about, they can. And you can find us on the internet. Our business is at getlighthouse.com. We have tons of great helpful content for free for managers at getlighthouse.com/blog. And you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at eVanish. So it's just a letter E and then vanish like disappear, where I'll tweet a lot about product and leadership stuff.
Vanish like disappear. I love that. I say my name is Jevin, or Kevin with a J. Yeah, so we've all got our ways of describing ourselves. Lighthouse has got my favorite article on running one-on-ones, the reason why to do it. So like if you want to talk, if you're thinking about it, it's got a really good slide deck you can browse through in a couple of minutes to get the idea. Some really great leaders who are proponents of it, and how you can start running one, and even how to ask your boss to start running one-on-ones. So I send these articles to people all the time, so I'll link to those as well if you're interested in exploring. Jason, thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, Jevin.
All right, everyone. So from Jason and myself, see you next time and build those remote teams. Bye for now. Hey listeners, we're really trying to get the message out about how remote teams can be so awesome. If you found this podcast helpful, would you take 60 seconds to leave us a review in iTunes? It helps us rank to have more people learn about this show, and it helps us know which content is the most helpful. As a thank you, I'll try to read every review on the show and give you a shout out. Thanks a lot.